Guys, it's Dave, and we've got a great tutorial series video that we're starting today. So one of the most common questions that we get asked up here at the store is, hey, I want to paint my gun. How do I paint my gun? Well, it's kind of a complex question, and we try to explain it, and we finally got around to it and said, you know what, we've got another custom we're going to paint, and we're going to get a little fancy and bust out the airbrush for this one. So we're actually going to teach you guys. So step one of this video, which is what today's video is going to cover, will be how to prepare your gun for paint and basic priming and why all of that is important. So stick with us. So we're going to flip this camera around and we're going to show you what we got going with. 1 second. So what we've got here is the lower receiver for an Apex rifle, and the reason why we have it apart is I wanted to show you guys all the different steps we take when we prep a gun for paint. We decided to use this Apex rifle to build kind of a standard military issue M4A1 type of thing. It's not perfect, but it's pretty close. And we had some neat things lying around that we had access to. It's stuff we normally can't sell, like these like EOTech sites that we're going to throw on here, so that'll be fun. Anyway, let's get to it. So let's show you what all we do to prep. The most important thing when you're prepping a gun for paint is to cover up all of the things where you don't want paint to go. And that can mean two different things. It could mean that for this type of paint job, you just don't want paint in a specific place. In this case, that's things like the trigger, specifically, that we have covered up. It could be things where it's like detrimental for paint to get into. So just to be safe, now we're going to paint the gun fully assembled, but we went ahead and took it apart so we could cover up things like your air nozzle and the back half of your gearbox so that where air can get in, just to be extra safe. It's also why we covered up the bottom of the pistol grip. Technically speaking, you really only have to cover the screws, but we decided we wanted to go ahead and cover the entire motor plate since it is vented, and we just didn't want to risk anything getting up into the motor, causing any weird smells, any strange stuff like that. We're also going to leave the stock totally in while we paint. I don't want the buffer tube to be painted for the most part. That's just not what we're going for. You could do that if that's what you were into. There's no reason why you could or could not, although it might affect the fitment of your stock. So we're going to be careful and not do that as well. Now on the upper receiver, we've taped off a couple of things. So we've gone ahead and taped up the front lens on the optic and the back lens on the optic. We are also going to go back over, although I'm going to do this after the fact because we want to change the color of the sights. We're going to do the front sight post and the rear sight post in different colors, just to kind of offset them a little bit, make it a little easier to see. So that's pretty much it for masking. Let's move on to what you guys are going to need to do that with. Alright, so what you've got here is what we use to mask everything with and what we're about to use to paint it. Let's talk about why these things are important. Right here we've got regular, I think this is Duck brand blue painter's tape. This is stuff you can find at most hardware stores. We actually got ours from the supermarket across the street. So pretty simple stuff to find. You can use any kind of tape here. We just recommend something that's going to peel off clean and it's going to make a good seal so you don't get anything where you don't want it. Don't be afraid to use a little bit more of the stuff than you think you need, and you can always use a razor blade or a knife to trim it a little bit more perfectly where you want to be a little bit more precise. That's what we did around the edge of the lenses on the optic to make sure it was nice and flush and we could get paint right up to the edge of the glass and not on it. But don't worry if you guys get a little paint where you don't want it. We're going to show you in a later video how to remove paint you don't want because we're going to weather this thing, and it's kind of the same concept. Now for paint, you guys want to start with a primer. This is the step that we're going to show you in painting today. The reason why primer is important is that most paint isn't designed to actually adhere and stick to the different surfaces of an airsoft gun. Than metals and the plastics namely. However, colored paint and the pigment in the paint generally sticks better to primer. So we're going to start with a flat black, so it's going to be as close a match as possible to the actual original gun. Any brand will do. We have ours covered for royalties and licensing reasons and because we don't really want to get sued. But pick your favorite. There's 1,000,001 different brands. You can get cheap generic hardware store brand, Krylon, Rust-Oleum. Those of you guys who wanted to go ahead and bust out the airbrush and go a little crazy, you can do that as well. There's some great surface primers there that you can use. And we'll show you how to paint with an airbrush a little bit later. However, all of these techniques will apply to a simple rattle can. The big difference, and the reason why we're going to use the airbrush for the primary majority of painting of this gun, is going to be because we have to do all this indoors. So tonight we're actually painting after hours, and the fumes aren't going to be a big of a deal because it's just me and the camera guy here. However, in later steps of filming this video, we'll have to do it during the week when the store's open, and we don't want to fumigate all the guys out of the back room. So we're going to teach you some stuff about airbrushing as well. However, it just comes down to finding the right colors of spray paint if you want to go that way. The airbrush just gives us a little bit more control, and that's why we're going to use it to paint this particular gun. So without further ado, we're going to reassemble this bad boy and show you how we paint it. Other things to note before you guys start spray painting: make sure you're in a well-ventilated area. Always wear a respirator, even if you guys are in the out of doors. Paint particles aren't good to breathe in, and it's super not recommended. So there you go, guys. We're going to go ahead and paint this sucker up and show you some tricks. So first things about spray painting, guys, make sure your spray paint works. As you can see, we tested it here already. And then the other thing too, when you're spray painting with primer or any kind of spray paint, make sure you start from before the gun so that you don't get that rough jet of like paint particles leaving the nozzle, and that you finish after, so all the extra paint that you didn't quite want that's just going to spittle out at the end doesn't end up on what you're trying to paint either. So we're going to shake this one more time really, really good, and we're just going to start spraying away. Out of the way. Now what you're looking for here in this step is good, even coverage. And to make sure that everything gets a proper coat. So that when we go back to airbrush the colors on later, that way all the paint sticks. So you leave it to dry, you try not to inhale too many of the fumes, and we'll come back to you in a bit when it's done. You guys will see something going on here sometimes, and you'll be wondering what this effect is. This is from spraying your spray paint too close. So the easy way to do this, if it's still wet, just wipe it off, wait for everything to dry, and then come back for a second pass. This can also happen if you're outside and it's too humid or the temperature is wrong, and sometimes you need to adjust your distance accordingly. Sometimes the temperature is just not going to be right. So we're going to fix this one up, and then we'll look at it when it's all primed and ready. All right, so there you have it. We've got a mostly primed gun. We've got primer in all the places that we're worried about. We are going to battle wear the gun, so if some of the paint doesn't stick, it's not going to be the end of the world. It's going to make it look nice. So remember, the key important tips are, number one, make sure that you mask off all the things you don't want to paint. For example, we did not want paint on our trigger. We didn't want paint on our scope adjustments right there, or on the lenses. So we taped all that stuff up. Number two, make sure you use a primer before you start applying color. There's a lot of primer that is colored, and that's totally fine. It's just a matter of what you guys want. So stay tuned, and we will be covering how to do a lot of cool patterning and battle wearing and all kinds of neat finishes to your airsoft gun once it's in this primed state in the next video. My name's Dave. We'll catch you guys next time.